Well, hey, welcome to the next episode of the Starfish in the Church podcast. Today is going to be a lot of fun. Today we've got the Ferguson, David.
Yep.
Dave Ferguson.
Capital T, the.
That's right, capital T. Dave, many of you have probably benefited from his work. He's the president of the Exponential Conference. He's also visionary lead catalyst for NewThing. He is the founding and lead pastor of Chicago's Community Christian Church, which is a multi-site church, first church with a campus on the moon, which I don't know, it's amazing.
Yeah, it'll be there when the community gets there. It'll be ready to go.
It's true. And recently I came into a partnership with NewThing. It didn't work out, so I'm starting a new network. It's called NewThing.
Yeah, the NewThing network.
I want to get in your network then.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually starting one called Newest Thing Network too. So
just as long as it's not nudist thing.
No, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Well, then I don't want to be a part of your network.
Okay, swipe. Next topic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Dave, thanks so much for making time today. We're really looking forward to this conversation with you.
Hey, my pleasure. This is gonna be fun.
Well, hey, why don't we just jump in? Lance, why don't you give us a little overview of what we're trying to do with the Starfish and the church and what's with the whole analogy?
Yeah, well, the analogy comes from our co-author, Ori Brofman, that we'll be having a book coming out called The Starfish in the Church. But Ori has a book that a lot of church leaders have read called The Starfish and the Spider that came out a few years ago. The metaphor being that if you cut the head off a spider, the spider dies. If you cut the leg off of a starfish, it's going to multiply. And so these are kind of metaphors of movement, or what will kill a movement or keep something good from being a movement versus what can really become a movement. So we're running with that same metaphor as it regards to church leadership, faith-based leadership. And so the Starfish in the Church is about, well, how can we bring more starfish type of leadership? And so inviting guests like Dave, who've been doing this stuff for a long, long time.
Yeah,
is perfect in this wheelhouse.
Right now, movement is such a buzzword. And one of the things, Dave, not to kind of, blow sunshine at you, but a lot of people are talking about movement. I think you're actually leading one.
Yeah.
And that's pretty remarkable. There's very few examples of that, I think, in the West. So we're curious, man, at kind of starting on the top side, it's pretty easy for people to see you are a leader who is empowered and released and sent scores, like hundreds and thousands of leaders, actually. So I'm curious, though. I imagine in your past, there have been times where you weren't perfect like you are now. And when have you been sort of, let's say, complicit with spider-like leadership? I'm just going to ask you to go ahead and just put it out there. Like, when have you felt like maybe your leadership was oppressive, and it wasn't maybe something you were even aware of until like halfway through it or on the backside, you went, oh man, I was being a little Caesar,
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like kind of all of our gifts kind of have a shadow, to them too, a dark side to them. And so, yeah, I think God was kind enough to give me a leadership gift, and probably on an apostolic kind of leadership gift. But when we first started the church, our Community Christian Church in Chicago, I was 25. My brother John was 23. It was just a bunch of friends from college. And that first kind of core team that we had, I drove them hard. I mean, really, really hard. In fact, so much so that by within the first year, all of our whole band, and also made up our key volunteers, all of them, I think, except for one person, just quit. And at the time, like, to me, I was kind of like doing one of those, like, all right, you guys just don't have the whatever it takes attitude. You don't have, the courage to give whatever it takes. It was those kind of things. But I think in looking back on it, I think my drivenness my drivenness to succeed, just it crushed the whole, it crushed them. And because basically we had the same people who were showing up for Sunday and who were doing most of the service. We also had them doing setup and tear down. We were in a temporary facility. Then we'd also do like a midweek twice a month, and I had them doing setup and tear down. And there were times when they were kind of like, I don't know if I'm not sure I can do all this. And I just wasn't hearing it. I wasn't hearing it. And I think I look back on that, and that was, I was blind to it too. I mean, totally blind to that. And so in the process, we lost some good people, and it was a setback. But I think it was also kind of a wake up call to me. And I think one of the things that I realize now is that if God wants his mission to be accomplished, and he's equipped people with gifts to accomplish that mission, then let them do what they're gifted to do, and trust God's kind of grand design that he's got this.
Right on.
And so they did have gifts, but I was pushing them way outside their gifts, and I was pushing them way outside what they should have been doing. And it not only was it not, it just wasn't sustainable. And they just said, uncle, and they said, forget it. We're out of here.
Wow. I want to ask you a question, Dave, in regard to that. And once again, not to blow sunshine or rainbows or whatever you said, but seriously. And I was talking to Rob before we came on. I said, oh, here's the first time I met Dave and hung out a day or so with you, around 2005, 2006. And I told Rob, I said, the first impression I had from Dave was not only he's this high level competency leader, but man, he's one of the most humble guys I've ever been around. And how do you balance strong leadership with that centeredness and staying humble and being aware of yourself and learning the lessons like you just spoke of? How do you maintain that at the pace of leading a movement?
Well, I mean, you're assuming that I have.
How do you try to do that, Dave?
Okay.
Tell us how you fake it.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, how do you,
with that I do, and I just went to lunch with one of the guys on our team. I think for me is, I think I genuinely feel grateful. Like, there's, and that part, I don't think, I'm not faking any of that. Like, I am genuinely grateful for like the marriage that I have. Sue's awesome. I could brag for the next 10 minutes about my kids, who, are just, and I feel grateful for how God's blessed that. But then also when I get to the other stuff, we talk about like Community Christian Church. It's an awesome church. And I don't mind working my butt off. I like hard work, but I also know that there's something happening here. And particularly we're in a season right now where there's some things that go way beyond leadership strategy and tactics that are happening that are only by God's goodness.
That's good.
And Rob's been a part of NewThing, and NewThing, we're getting to see some things now that you're right. It's getting close to like we could almost call movement kind of stuff. And Rob's close enough to know that it's nothing I did. I'm a part of it, and I think God's using my gifts, so it's not a false humility. But I'm genuinely grateful, and even that, I think, Lance, you're close enough to Exponential. What we're doing with Exponential, the sum total of what's happening there is way better than the effort that we're putting into this thing.
Oh man, yeah.
And so, I think when you. If you could, I don't know. I genuinely feel grateful, and I think that puts you in a good place, because if you're feeling grateful, then I think the credit's going to the right place. And I think it puts you in a good place to be used by God too. I don't know.
That's good,
Dave. How do you just quickly? How do you cultivate the gratitude? Like, how do you cultivate that art of noticing? Because you are, you're an apostolic leader. I bet you're a 3 on the Enneagram. Like, you're about achievement and taking new ground.
My daughter says a 7 or an 8.
Oh,
wow.
Anyway, let's not go down that rabbit hole.
You're very kind. You're very kind to 8.
So, how do you stop to pause in a way that becomes meaningful like that?
Part of it, I think, is it's a gift. I mean, like on the Strength Finders, positivity is one of my strengths. So I tend to see like the good things that God's doing in my life. So I kind of naturally go there. So that's kind of a gift. I think the discipline of journaling too, I think forces me to kind of pause and reflect almost on a daily basis. And I think doing that, I mean, and you guys are saying nice things about me, but it also is a reminder of there's a lot of parts of me that are still screwed up, and it's not wasted on me, because there's people who are far better leaders who have really hosed things, and then I could totally do that. But again, it's kind of, I think that kind of partly by gifting, but I think partly that pausing and reflecting kind of helps me almost on a daily basis, kind of go like, okay, you got a really good thing going. And it's only by God's grace.
Mm-hmm. So back to your story.
Yeah.
Talking about hosing things. You kind of ran over your initial team.
Yep.
They got disenfranchised. They left. Like, when was it in your journey where you began to realize, oh, you know what? They weren't just being lazy. This is me. This was about my dark side. Like, when did that happen? What triggered that? I know sometimes there's like catalytic moments where the light comes on, and then sometimes it's gradual, like the sun rising. Like, what was it like for you to begin to realize like, oh, that was a huge miss?
It was probably a process over the next couple of years, because with that initial, it was our volunteer team, not really even our staff team, but our volunteer team that I just ran over. I think it was over probably the next couple of years of having to rebuild that team, and then realizing like, no, nobody's going to do what you're asking, because that's insane. That I think I really came to kind of realize, okay, that was more about you than it was about them.
Your relationship with your brother, John.
Yeah.
So you guys started CCC together, unique giftings that you both have. How did that relationship, that working relationship, play out, and how did you make it happen? Not only as being, co-laborers together, but brothers too. Talk a little bit about that, because it's a unique thing.
Yeah. So like, how do we make it work?
Yeah.
So, I mean, how many times did you guys want to actually kill each other?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's times we don't mix words, and I mean, and it's a little bit of kind of like, we're a little bit of the parents at the church there too. So, I mean, yeah, and sometimes we fight, but usually we go into the bedroom and we have it out, and then you come out with a smile for the rest of the kids. So, yeah, I mean, he doesn't hesitate to tell me what he thinks. And I'd say both ways too. Like, if he thinks that I'm out of line, and I think that's probably been good for me too. That's probably, to have your actual biological brother there who's like, no, you're not all that.
Yeah, he's not impressed at all.
No. And was not afraid to tell me about it. But at the same time, I think that we're also confidants for one another, because if things aren't going well, we absolutely know we got each other's back. And whether that's, ministry related or personal related, whatever it is. So I think the depth and the quality of trust in that relationship is really what's made it work. And you know what too? I mean, I was thinking about our conversation. I don't know if you want to go there on this, but I think there was something about the home that we grew up in too. We grew up in a really, I don't know how to say it exactly, except to say a really healthy, for the most part, very functional, Christ-centered home. Like, my mom and dad, they've been married, what is it now, 58 years. I mean, they like genuinely love each other. They're fun to be around. They love Jesus. They're serious Christ followers. He's still one of our community pastors at one of our locations. Wow. We're at a location it's in a gated golf community. Everybody's 55 and over. They're there. But I think they cultivated in our house the kind of environment that you guys are talking about, kind of that nurtures kind of this starfish kind of culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, the thing that was striking me too is every church leader should be able to have somebody who's in immediate proximity, who's got a lot of influence within their church, who is not impressed with them at all. And not in a combative way, like, I'm here to take you down. But if you're a leader who doesn't have someone like that in your inner circle of 3 or 4 or 5, you're in a really dangerous place.
Right.
So Dave, obviously what you're saying is your home life had a profound effect on what became the culture of the church that you planted. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think this hit me many years later, because people would come and they'd say, hey, one of the things I noticed about community is it has a very empowering, trusting, you can kind of do it kind of culture.
Mm.
And I think as people began to say that, I began to think, and this may sound a little cheesy, but that was exactly the kind of environment I grew up in. And I know everybody doesn't have that. And
Right.
sometimes I'm hesitant because I know, but I think that's what God wants for us in our homes. And so I grew up with parents who like, no, you can do this. I totally trust you. And so when John and I planted a church and we're 25 and 23 and brand new people show up and they got ideas of things they want to do to make a difference, we just took that same culture and we said, oh yeah, you can do this. I totally trust you. Like in a lot of churches and a lot of organizations, candidly, you don't usually lead with trust and kind of faith and belief that there's something important they're meant to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think partly because we were so young and because it was the church, the kind of family we grew up in, we grew up in that kind of environment. We just kind of took our family's culture and that became our church's culture. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense.
Yeah, and I think there's something actually profoundly important underneath what you're saying, which is a lot of church leaders haven't actually done the hard soul work to think about how has my family system actually impacted me?
You're right.
And then secondly, and is the culture of my family what I would want a church to become?
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's sort of like, that's job one. It's like, hey, I need to figure out what my assets are, but also what my wounds are from my childhood and be really self-aware of that. And then secondly, is my family culture, my marriage and with my kids, the kind of thing I would love to see reproduced and multiplied.
And see, like in my case, it's like, I think we did what everybody else does. You just repeat whatever you grew up with. You repeat the same system. I just happen to be blessed enough. I grew up in a pretty healthy system.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just repeated that behavior. And so there really wasn't quite as much work for me to do to kind of like debunk all the screwed upness, because my mom and dad kind of, yeah, you know what, for the most part, grace permeated who they are,
right,
and our family. And there was a real strong belief, oh yeah, you guys can do this. There's something important you're meant to do, go get them. And so we kind of took that into our church culture.
Well, thanks for the gift of your transparency, man. It's a big deal. And I know it will be encouraging to the leaders listening to this, you know, to know they're not alone in their epic screw ups.
Oh yeah,
man. So let's talk more on the solution side. You know, with the Starfish, we're trying to help people discover ways to do this sort of decentralized, empowering leadership. And that's really your wheelhouse. And so your latest book is Hero Maker. And really it's Starfish to the core. Why don't you give us an overview of first of all, what is a Hero Maker? What do you mean by that?
Sure. One of the things we were able to do is we did a little bit of research on churches across North America, and we found that just a fraction of the churches were actually what we call reproducing or even multiplying kind of churches. And we began to look closer at what were the leaders of those churches that were either reproducing and even had the potential. And we began to look at some churches even also in the East, not just in the West, that were actually movement-making kind of churches, which is exactly what you're talking about. And one of the things we did, we brought together thought leaders on a couple different occasions, and we began to brainstorm, okay, so what are the practices of these leaders that are leading these kind of reproducing and movement-making kind of churches and organizations? We had a long laundry list of practices, and then we kind of pared it down to just to really eventually to what we got in the book, the 5 practices. But I think it was actually Dave Rhodes, who kind of took a look at that list on the board, and you know, Dave, he said, you know what distinguishes these people, and he kind of used a lot of this language anyway around the hero maker's journey. He said, these are leaders who aren't trying to be the hero, but they're making other people the heroes.
Man.
And then someone else spoke up and said, yeah, I mean, in a phrase, they're like hero makers, and it just kind of stuck.
Wow.
And so basically we took those practices and we really began to look at the life of Jesus too. And we said, yeah, and we shortened them up so they were memorable. But then we said, yeah, these are the 5 practices hero-making leaders, the kind of leaders that can lead movements.
Wow. That story there, are you familiar, or either one of you guys, I imagine you both are familiar with Story Brand,
Yeah.
Donald Miller stuff. And of course, that's one of the first points that he makes. He says that the biggest mistake that most organizations make, especially in their marketing, is they make themselves the heroes rather than making, the potential client or the person that they're supposed to be serving the hero.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a huge point. And Jesus was the epitome of the hero maker.
Oh, absolutely.
No doubt.
I mean, you go to John 14:12, and Jesus looks at this, this ragtag group of fishermen that he's and working class guys that he's brought around himself, and he says this crazy thing where he says, "Hey, you're going to do the things that I've done."
Mm.
And then he kind of like an addendum. Oh, in fact, no, you're going to do greater things than these.
Wow.
And essentially, he was saying, you know what? You're going to take the gospel to more places. You're going to take the good news of this movement around the world, not me. You're going to write the best-selling book, the Bible, not me. And he was basically saying, all right, I'm going to make you the heroes of this redemptive movement.
I just want to notate, Dave Ferguson said that Jesus did not write the Bible. He just said that. End of career.
He inspired it.
Yeah.
I'm a hero destroyer.
Dave was technically correct, and I know that Dave knew what he was saying. So,
well, Rob, you also forgot I'm in Chicago, not Dallas, so you can get away with a lot more up here.
So, what are the practices of a hero maker?
Well, the first one we talk about multiplication thinking, and that's this kind of this shift. Instead of thinking, I wonder what God could do through my leadership, which is kind of our natural tendency of the hero, instead to go like, no, I believe God works best through multiplied leadership. And one of the things we stressed with multiplication thinking is it takes a big dream. You have to have a big dream, and that's what catalyzes multiplication thinking. I can give you a story if you want.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. I remember you guys know Neil Cole. I remember sitting in a workshop with Neil Cole. This goes way back. And at that point in time, I had a dream of, I wanted to have a church of 1,000 people, right? That's going to be my church. Just even, at least the way I talk about it, my church.
My people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's just, it's done. I want to throw up. And, but Neil did this exercise. He said, okay, I want you to take your current dream and then multiply it times 1,000,000. And so you do the math, multiply times 1,000,000. All of a sudden, okay, 1 billion. And then he said, now I want you to figure out, how do you accomplish that dream? And in that moment, it was going, the size of that thing pulled me outside of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, maybe 1,000, I might be able to get 1,000 people in a room, right? But 1 billion, I was gonna have to work through lots of different people. I was gonna have to work outside my tribe. I was gonna have to collaborate and partner with all kinds of people to accomplish, reaching 1 billion people. And so one of the things that we challenge people to do is this idea of, to get to multiplication thinking, you have to have a dream, okay, that really makes you dependent on God, a God-sized kind of dream. And I think that's what and again, Jesus, the hero maker, last thing he says, Acts 1:8, hey guys, we're taking this thing from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria, the ends of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And, that small group of folks there who were his followers, there was no doubt if they were going to do it, they were going to have to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples who make disciples.
Right. So a dream bigger than yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love the way my buddy in Oscar Muru in Nairobi Chapel, he says, you need to have a dream that makes God sweat.
The other thing that strikes me about what you're saying, though, Dave, is the multiplication thinking also forces you to be very focused on a smaller number of people. So for Jesus, it wasn't like, I'm trying to multiply this through the thousands that are gathered for the free bread. It's like, no, I got 12 dudes, and I'm going to spend 3 years multiplying my life into theirs so they can multiply it into others.
Yeah, in a phrase, we talk about that, dream big, start small. So dream big, ends of the earth. That's where we're taking this thing. Start small. Start with these 12 people that you have around you. Invest in them.
So practically, that makes me think, just church leaders listening to this, like, can you actually right now in 90 seconds or less, give me the name of your 12.
It's a great exercise.
And if you can't, you've probably got a fundamental shift in how you need to think about your relational world, because you're not living in the pattern of Jesus, you know?
Yeah, it's good.
So, all right, what's the next practice? Let's keep moving.
Well, then the second practice, we talk about permission giving. And permission giving is this idea that you shift from, instead of thinking, I want to see what God can do through my leadership, you said, I want to see what God can do through others, and I let them know what I see in them. And this one is, once you kind of realize, okay, this is going to take more than just me, it's going to take others, you begin to look at the people around you in your organization, or the people that are sitting in the pews or the chairs of your church, and you realize God has something really important for them to do. In Ephesians 2:10, kind of, there's a dream that he has for their life. And one of the simple tools that we give them in the book is we talk about I, C, and U conversations. The four most important letters of the alphabet, I, C, N, U. And how do you have those I, C, and U conversations?
So do an I, C, and U conversation with Lance right now. For real.
For real?
Yeah.
I think one of the things I see in Lance is he has a unique ability to kind of see things that other people don't see.
That's true.
Like when you wrote the book Unleader, I think you, and I'll say another guy who's kind of like you, I think, is Larry Osborne. Everybody else is kind of going this way, and it's true. But you know what? Did you just notice this thing this way? Which is more true almost. And I think you have a unique gift for being able to see and have important insights that other people kind of miss because they're kind of going with the flow. And I think that's an important gift to the kingdom. I think you ought to keep using it.
Appreciate that.
What do you think, Rob? Do you see that in him?
Absolutely. He's my favorite prophet on Facebook.
Yeah. There you go.
Because whatever's going on in the current, either ghetto of the evangelical world or in the headlines, I invariably I'm curious. It's like, how is Lance going to see this?
Right.
And he's going to have like this edge that pushes me back to Jesus, the advocate for the marginalized, Jesus, the one who's resisting empire, and that it's really,
well, you wouldn't believe all the posts that I write and delete before I go ahead and post them.
Those are the ones I want to see.
Yeah, to keep from getting unfriended more than I already do. So, yeah.
Another real practical question, like how often are you having I, C, and U conversations?
I think it's kind of become a rhythm. And I mean, it's something I try to be intentional about too.
So Dave, so far we've got multiplication thinking. We've got permission giving. What's the next one?
Third one, disciple multiplying, which if I was only picking one of the five, that's the one that I would say, okay, just focus on that one. And that's a shift from, instead of when you're the hero, what you do is you're trying to create followers. But what we're talking about here is how are you actually sharing your life in a way that multiplies disciples. And the word that we use a lot around community, use a lot through NewThing, is also just apprenticeship. How do you do that in a way that's you're constantly, your life's rubbing off on somebody else's life to create other followers of Jesus?
So how do you make, in your culture, how does that become normative? Like what's the actual nuts and bolts of the practice?
I mean, in some ways it is very relational. You've heard us talk about this, and I think you've taught this too, Rob. We talk about, in John, there's this phrase that he uses about how Jesus just hung out with his disciples, and it's actually his word diatribo, and it means just to rub off. And basically it's this idea that Jesus spent time rubbing off on them. And I think I heard someone say this, who was I heard say just a couple of weeks ago, you got to find time, not just for people in your calendar, but in your life. And we do have a tool that we give people called the 5 steps of apprenticeship. But basically what it is just how do you actually find time in your life for whatever you're doing to have them hang out with you and let the Jesus in you rub off on them.
Yeah, and it's like the greater the proximity, the greater the rub off factor is.
Absolutely.
you know?
I think this is also true as we train church planners too. I mean, it's not just at the smallest level. I mean, our first church planning residents who are church planners in training, we didn't even have a program. I just said, just come and hang out with us. You'll catch it.
Yeah.
That's why, Dave, you know, I'm like a raving advocate for simple expressions of churches in neighborhoods, you know, and one of the primary reasons for that is because the proximity is so much richer. Like when you're making disciples in the neighborhood, they're actually getting access to see like how you treat your kids, like what your marriage is actually like, how you're interacting when the neighbor 3 houses down does something really stupid and there's a conflict. How do you actually navigate those things, you know? And there's enough proximity to run into each other in all the second and third spaces. Right. And a lot of churches are still working so hard on programmatic solutions that kind of try to contain everything in an hour or two meeting once a week. And what were your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. And I think when I heard this guy say it, I mean, what you were talking about, exactly what came to mind when he said, hey, make room for people in your life, not just your calendar. And I think what we do in a lot of our churches, and I've been guilty of this, I think we ask people to make room in their calendar. Find a small group, get in a small group, develop an apprentice, meet them at Starbucks once a week. That's making room in your calendar. And that's a good thing, but it's not the same thing as making room in your life. Yeah. And what you're talking about is making room in your life.
Come on.
Because I mean, you're right. They're there, you know, spontaneously.
Right.
You know, like if they're in your neighborhood, I mean, yeah, come on, let's watch the Bears game together. You know, yeah, hey, we're shooting hoops in the driveway, and you see them pull in, and they come over and they're shooting hoops with you, and then you know you're having a beer afterwards or something. So you're making room in your life, not just in your calendar. And I think that's a really important shift. If churches make that shift, that's how great disciple multiplying gets to happen.
Yeah, that's job one.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, you get that better than anybody.
I don't think so.
No, he does. I mean, I've been hanging around with Rob for the last few days at his house, and just the neighboring stories, and just it's catalytic and it's beautiful. And so you can't replicate, you can't institutionalize that. You can't. We've done it in pretentious ways, well-intentioned pretentious ways, like you talked about, Dave. But it has to come out of our natural flow of inviting people to be with us.
Well, and when we have to just put it in our calendar and we have to program it all the time, that's when it's a spider kind of organization as opposed to a starfish.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well said, man. Well, what's the fourth practice?
The fourth one's gift activating. So after you kind of your multiplication thinking, you're thinking, okay, I can't just do it myself. I have to do it through others. Permission giving, you start to have those I see in you conversations, and you tell them, yeah, you can do it. Then you go to disciple multiplying, and you're actually doing life on life kind of apprenticeship and rubbing off on each other. Then the fourth one is this, it's got a gift activating. And that's where you fully activate their gifts. And I think that's what you see in the Great Commission, Matthew 28. I mean, Jesus says, all right, we spent the last 3 years together. I got all the authority. Now I'm giving it to you. You go. You go and do what I've done with you. You go and do with others. And I think one of the challenges we give them in the Hero Maker book, as far as a simple tool, is what we call commissioning. And basically it's this idea that after they've apprenticed you with you at whatever level that you're sending them out to do whatever you're sending them out, it could be a missional community, it could be a small group, it might be a church plant, whatever. You lay hands on them as a sign of blessing, and then you pray for them and you send them out. They don't continue to be your assistant. They're not your co-leader. They're out doing their thing, God's thing, and you're going to find someone else that you can begin to invest in.
Pretty good.
One of the tools we've developed here in Kansas City is an assessment process to help people discover calling. And we use the metaphor GPS. So instead of global positioning system, it's gifts, passion, story. And so in all of our discipling environments, we're having people repeatedly come back to those three things and do that in community, so people can basically help them discover their personal calling. And it seems like a lot of the gift activating the church has done has been more about trying to get people to volunteer in sort of pre-existing programs, which I'm all for. And I think that's a good kind of evolutionary step. But what I'm hearing you say is it's different. It's like categorically different. It's like we're commissioning you, not to just come and be a part of our program, but to discover really your gifts, your unique calling, and then go.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a fundamental shift there, because I mean, the one I think that you described that a lot of us in church world have fallen into is just filling slots. And there's a lot of pressure when you got programs, because you got a lot of slots you got to fill. And so you got to really stay away from, how do we not just fill slots, but instead go like, no, there's an important dream that God has for your life. It's part of my responsibility to help you discover that gift and then use it to its full. And when you don't need me anymore, then I release you and I go do that all over again with somebody else.
Right on.
That's great.
Well, you got to give us the last practice, man.
Sure. Last one is kingdom building. And this is a shift in what you count. It's a different kind of scoreboard. Instead of, we talk about this way, instead of counting who's coming to my thing, it's who am I sending out to do God's thing? And, not just how many people are showing up at my missional community, my small group, my ministry, my church, but instead what the important thing is, how many people am I sending out to do God's thing? And when you begin to count that, that's the stuff that movement's made of.
Right on.
That's excellent.
Right on. Well, Dave, this is so good, man. You make things, you've got a way of taking the cookies and putting them on the bottom shelf. It's super helpful, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Dave, where can, if you want to connect with either the Hero Maker resources or other things that you've done, like what's the best place for them to go to?
I thought a few things. I mean, one, they can come right to my website, daveferguson.org, and they can see all the different stuff there, daveferguson.org. If they're interested in the Hero Maker book, probably just jump right to Amazon. We do have a landing page, heromakerbook.org, and there's a few things you can pick up there too. But if you got church planners out there listening in, that they're interested in NewThing, they should go to newthing.org. We'd love to do whatever we could to help them in any way we possibly can.
Go NewThing.
Highly recommended. Yeah. Hey, Dave, thanks so much, bro. It's a very big honor to have you on here with us. We hope you'll do it again.
Well, I'm a big fan of both of you guys, and I am really pumped about this book you guys are going to write. So that's cool. Very, very cool.
We're excited about it.
Thanks, man. Thanks again, Dave.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.